Hey there, I'm Mark. Welcome into my studio where, as usual, on a hot summer day like it is today, this room's pretty hot and really humid. If you didn't know, this room is actually a little walled-off area that I built in my garage, and so I have a little wall-mounted air conditioning unit over there, and it does a decent job of keeping it mostly cool in here, but humidity is always a problem. And so storing my 3D printing filaments, for me, has always been an issue in here. Things like PLA are not too bad, but I print a lot with ABS, ASA, some with TPU as well, and those filaments tend to absorb a lot of moisture out of the air if you just leave them out in the open. And so over the years I've kind of looked at different ways to store these filaments and keep them dry, and about a year ago I released this little solution here. There's a video here on the channel about it. I think a lot of you have watched it. It's probably one of the more popular videos here on the channel. And it was just a very simple storage solution based on these kitchen dry sort of cereal containers that you can buy in bulk off of Amazon, and a 3D printed part that fits up here in the lid that just basically allows you to put some desiccant in here. So there's a little desiccant holder up underneath here and a holder for a hygrometer so we can measure the humidity inside of there. And you just drop your filament spool down inside of here and it keeps it dry. And it does a decent job, but the issue with this is when I want to print with these filaments, then I have to take them out of the box. Typically, if it's a filament that I really want to keep dry, I'll put it in my heated dryer that I have here that's just a single roll, actively heated dryer. And this allows you to print from this box. There's a little outlet in the back. And so I will load into my printer from there and leave this thing running with the heater to keep these dry while I'm printing. Then when I'm finished printing, I have to put them back in the container and seal it back up. And hopefully it hasn't, gotten too much humidity in the container while the filament was out. So it's always a bit of a hassle to switch filaments and do all of that. Some of you have reached out on that earlier video and asked if it's possible to build one of these things that you can print from the dry box itself. And yeah, that's definitely possible. I've seen some other people on YouTube and elsewhere that have done that. And I think I actually even linked some of you to some of those other videos as well. But I was never really happy with any of those solutions enough to actually use them for myself or to completely, endorse them and tell you that I think they're a really great idea. Until just recently. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I ran across a solution on Printables.com, and there's a YouTube video as well from a guy named Steven. So props to him for this idea, and I'll link to his YouTube video and to his Printables listing down in the description of this video so you can check those out. And they were kind of the starting point inspiration for what I've come up with here. And his big innovation, at least to me, was just taking this whole box and turning it upside down. So whereas, this was kind of the bin before and this was the lid, from now on in this video, we're going to call this part down here the base, and this part that's the main part of the cereal bin itself is the lid. So this allows us to have a nice flat surface that we can then build a filament roller system that sits on top of. We still have our desiccant bucket down here that is easy to pull in and out as needed, so you can refill the desiccant if you need. And then on the back side, we've put a little coupler here so that we can just pop this top off just like so. A bit hard to do with one hand. There we go. And we've got our filament right here. So I can, when I want to swap out, what's in the printer, this one right now is the one that's in the printer, I can just unload the filament, load it, push it back into the bin here. It does a pretty good job of winding itself up, and then I can just put this cap right on there and load the new one in, and we're good to go. So with these, I've dried out all of my filaments that were sitting out that needed to be in dry containers. I used the heated dryer here to dry them down to about 10% humidity or so on the reading here. And then I've loaded them in here, and they never have to come out again. And just looking across here, all of these are after 3 or 4 weeks they've been in here, some of them. Some of them it's been closer to like 2 weeks, but all of them are hovering somewhere between 10 and 15% humidity, which for a room like this that's very humid, like over 50% almost all of the time, is really good. So I've been really happy with these, enough that I feel like now I can share them with you guys on video as well. And so we're going to jump over to the build desk. I'm going to show you the parts that you need to print out to build one of these things, and then also the parts. There's a few parts that we need to source, the bin itself, and then a couple of little pieces of hardware to put everything together. So we'll assemble one of these things. I'll show you how that works, and then maybe I'll give a little bit of hint in the future at some other projects that I have kind of an ecosystem ideas to build around this thing. So we'll talk about that at the end of the video. But for the moment, let's put one of these things together. Okay, so here on the desk I have all of the parts that we're going to need to build this filament dry box system. And we'll start over here on the right hand side. These are the parts that you're going to need to purchase, and I will leave links to my version, the thing that I purchased from Amazon, for each of these down in the description of this video. Of course, shop around, because a lot of these come in sort of multiple branded versions and they're really all the same and the prices change all the time. But what you're going to need is one of these cereal bins, of course. You're looking for the one that has these kind of 3 ribs on one side of it, and then the telltale sign for me is the lid, and if the lid has this little hexagonal pattern in it, then you know you've got one that's going to be compatible with these parts. Also, this thing comes with a little plastic clear flap here that seals against this, and you're going to need to just pull that off and you can remove it and throw it away. We're not going to use that part. We're going to seal this up with our desiccant bin later on. So there's the bin. We're going to use 4 of these skateboard style bearings. We're going to use a single M3x8 screw, an M3 nut, and I've got an M3 washer here that we're going to use during the assembly process, but it doesn't actually stay in the final assembly. We're just going to use it to help pull our nut into position when we need to do that. And then optionally, one of these hygrometers as well. If you don't care about actively monitoring the humidity level inside of the container, you can of course leave that out. In addition to all of that, you're going to need some sort of silica gel desiccant, and I use this orange indicating one, so they start out orange and they turn green, a nice dark green, when they absorb a lot of moisture, and so you can use that to tell when they need to be replaced. And so with all of that, the purchased parts, and then I've also factored in the cost of, approximately the cost of printing all of these parts with the filament that I purchased. The total cost per bin comes out to somewhere between like $8 and $9 per bin based on the parts that I purchased. Again, your mileage may vary depending on where you live and how much things cost and whether you can find good deals on these things. But somebody was curious in my previous video with the other system how much it costs per container. So there you go. For me, this one is somewhere between $8 and $9 per container, everything included, desiccant, filament, the whole thing. Then over here we've got the parts that we need to print. Certainly a lot more parts than my previous solution, right? Just as a reminder, the previous solution was these 2 parts. Your hygrometer holder, which was also the lid of your basket. So you just fill this thing with desiccant, you pop this on here, and you put this into the opening there, and you're good to go. So definitely simpler. But this, I think the extra work and the extra printing is definitely worth it, given that now we can reliably print out of the container, and that's excellent. So this is what we need. We need 2 of these base pieces. I've given you 2 different versions of these in the STLs, so there's just a regular unsupported one, and you'll have to support this with your own slicer if you choose to use that one. I didn't like how my slicer was supporting the part all the time, and so I designed a version that has this support built into the bottom. You just pull that off once it's done printing, and you get a nice, really good bottom side of that piece there, and then you can just toss this away. This does use a bit more filament than standard supports would, of course, but I think it's worth it. Everything else you can just print with normal settings, and all of this I've printed with Polymaker Black ASA. Not required, right? You could print these out of PLA or just about any filament, which should be fine. I've printed them out of ASA because maybe we'll talk about this at the end of the video, but I have an idea for a future upgrade for this system that might require these parts to be able to withstand a little bit more temperature. And so I've just gone with ASA so that I don't have to reprint in the future. Additionally, these 2 axle parts, I do recommend that you print with 100% infill, so these are nice and solid. They're not gonna flex too much this way, and that'll help our system that rolls our filament to be a little bit more smooth. And then these parts here, which are our filament rollers, I've printed mine in black TPU, so they're a little bit squishy. And the reason that I do that is because I feel like they get better traction, especially if you've got one of these like cardboard style filament rollers or spools. These for me on bare plastic tended to just slip a bit. And with the TPU, there's enough grip there that they rotate nicely instead. And so I've been printing these with TPU, but again, not required if you've got a different kind of filament or you just want to print them out of the same filament that you've used here. Then we've got our tag holder, and then the tag itself, I print out of the color of filament that I'm going to put in the container. And so for today's example, I wanted to use this roll of filament for 2 reasons. This is Atomic Filament Dark Cherry Red, And the first reason I wanted to use it is because I wanted to be able to show it to you guys on video. A lot of you have asked on my Voron V0 build series videos, what is that dark red color that you've used for the Voron parts? It is this. It's atomic filament, dark cherry red. It's a beautiful color. And so, yeah, that's what it is, in case you were wondering, and you've now seen it on video. The real reason that I wanted to use this roll of filament, though, is these atomic filament rolls, I'm not super excited about the spools that they use. They're like this really thick plastic. They're a bit heavy, but they're also extremely wide. And so I just wanted to make sure that this fits into this bin. I'm pretty sure that it will, and that it fits on the roller system and works correctly. So that's why we're using this particular filament here. And what I do for these tags, and I've provided for you guys STLs for a blank tag if you want to put your own lettering on there, and then also some versions that have just the filament types, so PLA, ABS, ASA, so on. I actually also add the name of the brand here because that helps me to set my, or pull up the right settings in my slicer when I'm using a particular filament. But I just do a manual color change for the top 2 layers of this, and I print the main part of the tag in the color of the filament that I'm going to be putting in the bin, and then the letters in either black or white, you know, as a contrasting color, just so that it looks nice. This way up on my shelf, it's easy to see what's in each bin, and you can kind of get a preview of the color. So those are all the parts we need, and I'm going to get the desk cleaned off a bit, and we'll look at first the lid, which is the main body of our container here, and there's a few holes we need to drill and some other prep work we need to do before we get started putting that together, so we'll do that first. Okay, so let's work on our lid part here first. There are 2 holes that we're going to need to drill in this thing, and we need to measure the first one. So what I'll do is I'll grab just a bit of painter's tape here, and we're going to put it on the face of this side here, which is the side that has the 3 ribs, has this little sort of rectangular cutout. It's not completely cut out, it's just an indentation up here at the top. I'm going to put this down below the bottom edge of that, and we're going to measure down about 1 centimeter from there. So somewhere right around there. And then I'm just going to eyeball this to get it centered left to right underneath that thing. And actually, I've got it already pretty close. So right about there is where we're going to want that hole. And then the second hole that we're going to drill is just in the top of the lid here, right at this spot that they use to injection mold the part. And so that'll be our marker there. We don't need to measure anything. And what I'm going to do is start with a very small drill bit for pilot holes, and then I'm going to work my way up to the sizes that I need. And what I need are, for this top hole to be 3 millimeters, and for this one here, which is going to be where our Bowden tube coupler screws in, this is going to need to be 9 millimeters. Now for me, because I live in the United States of America, all of my drill bits that I have around here are in freedom units, not metric, and so what I end up doing is going up to 1/8 of an inch for the small hole and 3/8 of an inch for the larger hole, which is roughly approximately the same as the 3 millimeters and the 9 millimeters. So I'm just going to start with a small hole in both of these locations and then work my way up to the sizes that I need. So that was the 1/8 inch drill bit, so this top hole is now to the size we need, and we'll just keep going with the larger sizes on this hole over here until we get it up to the 3/8. Alright, so with that hole ready to go, we will introduce the missing piece that I forgot to mention earlier in the video that you're going to need, and you maybe were yelling at your screen, how are you going to put the Bowden tube into the thing? Yeah, you need one of these couplers as well. And again, link will be down in the description of this video. I don't believe that changes the cost estimate that I gave you for the total cost of this thing by much. Probably just, you know, like maybe 50 cents or 25 cents one way or the other. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. I left out a part. I apologize for that. Now we're up to date. So I'm just going to sort of manually pull some of the extra flash off of here. That's looking good. And now we can go ahead and screw this down into place. Right, and we just want to put that all the way in. And then there is a plastic printed part for the nut that will hold this in from the back side. My son calls this part the rocket. I understand why he calls it that. So this should just thread on nicely, just by hand is fine. And you may need to grab, depending on how tight this is, you may need to grab a wrench to hold on to this thing so that it doesn't spin, so you can get this screwed on nice and tight. And I like to tighten this all the way up until the kind of the fins of this rocket are pressed up against the back side of this container, and so it's nice and snug. It's not gonna move anywhere. And so there we're set. We have our filament path in and out of the container, and we need to worry about the top section here, this other hole that we drilled, which is for our filament guide / hygrometer holder. And so if you are using a hygrometer, now is the time to grab this thing and press fit it into place, just like so. On mine, because they're a little bit flaky, I've owned these for a long time. If I kind of jostle them around, they kind of reset. Yeah, this one came back. Sometimes that's an indication that I need to change the batteries, but I think we're good with this one. And so we're going to want to put this up underneath there with this one screw that we have. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and force this hex nut into this opening right here. And so in order to do that, what I'm going to do is grab the screw and this optional washer that I mentioned earlier, which is just to hold, to give this screw a little bit more of surface area against the hole on this side so that we don't widen the hole too much. And what I'm going to do is just screw this in place and then thread the nut on the other side and tighten this screw down to force the nut to pull it down into that hexagonal opening there. There we go. So I don't know if the camera shows that very well, but that's pulled down nicely into place there. So now we can remove this screw and the nut will stay in place, just like so. And I don't need the washer anymore, so I'm going to remove that. Just set it to the side. And now we want the hygrometer opposite from where our filament is going to come out. And so we put this one this way, and I'm just going to feed the screw in from the top and find that nut that we preset into place, and then just screw this down. There we go. Hey, it's under 50% humidity in here right now. Amazing. Oh, never mind. Okay, so with that, we have our lid almost complete. Now, optionally, you can also put the tag holder on the front here that'll hold our filament tag. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I just do that with hot glue. So what I've been doing to kind of make sure that they're all the same height, I align the top of this filament tag with this 100-ounce line that's upside down on this lid here. And I'm just going to put it right about there. So I'm just going to put some hot glue on the back side of this and then put that in place and hold it there for a couple seconds until it's ready to go. All right, and with that, our lid part is done. So I'm going to set that off to the side and grab the parts that we need to make our base and the rollers for our filament feeding system, and we'll do that one next. So here are the parts for our base, our axles and rollers and that sort of thing. So what we need to do is take one of these axles, go ahead and feed 2 of the bearings onto it, just somewhere here near the middle, and then we'll put the 2 rollers on the outside. Now this has a flat side, the axle, and so there's a corresponding flat side of this roller, and what you want to do is just push this all the way on so that the axle is flush with the opening on the end here. And then once you've done that, you can take the bearing and push it back against this way, and it'll lock onto this little extra tab that's on the roller piece. So we just push these that way, and we push the axles back out this way. And then once we have that, that should give us the correct spacing to then just go ahead and press the axle straight down into that opening right there, and it'll grab the bearings, and we have this nice rotation here. So we just do that one more time for the other side. And we're good to go. Then we grab our base, which is the lid of our original container. And these 2 things just fit in here. They lock together, puzzle piece style here, with these little trapezoidal sections. And there we go. So now our roll of filament will just sit nicely right on top of here, and we get good rolling motion. I don't know how to get the camera to see that, but there you go. That's kind of how it rolls. And we've got this opening down here where our desiccant will go, right? So you want to do this at kind of the last minute before you're ready to load the filament into the container, because you don't want your desiccant necessarily sitting out in this basket in the open, at least not in my very humid environment, for very long, right? So all we do is we grab this, we fill this thing up pretty close to the top, just like so. And then this lid is made to fit onto these little 4 tabs here. So this just slides on from the top, just presses in place once we find the right orientation for it. And then it rotates this way to lock in place. So now we have this nice little desiccant bin. It's nicely sealed, and if we ever need to, we can pop it out of here from the bottom and replace the desiccant in there and then pop it back in place. So all this does is it presses in place against this rubber seal that came with the container, and there are these 2 little kind of circular indents on either side of it. I like to put those on the kind of the front and the back here, because this allows me to be able to get either my finger or a little pair of tweezers or pliers or something underneath here to pull that out if I need to in the future, because the fit is fairly tight, and it's that way on purpose because we want a nice airtight seal. So we press that in place. We can pull it out this way using this little lip here if we need to in the future. And it sits up right underneath this roller holder, and the clearance should be just perfect as long as your part's all printed out nicely. All right, and then all that's left to do is to load our filament into the container. Now for me, I would put this in my active heated dryer first for a while to get it nice and dry before I do this. And I will do that after I record this video. I'll take it back out and dry it out. But here, just to show you how we load this in, you want to go ahead and put your filament on the rollers here. And this is gonna be a bit hard probably to get on video, but I reach up inside of the lid, and we'll see if we can get this on camera so you can see it, and just feed this through here, right, and grab it. And then you can just drop the lid down over the top. And seal it up like that. Then there's this last printed piece here, which is just a cap that fits nicely over the end of your filament and then presses into that coupler and locks in place. And there's this much of filament sticking out, like the filament goes all the way up to here. So that should give you enough slack so that, like, if you open this later on, you've got enough here to grab and pull out and you don't lose your filament inside the container. So that's what that cap is for. And then of course we take our little tag and we go ahead and just slide it over here into our tag holder so that we've correctly labeled our filament. And so there we go. It's all sealed up. It does turn nicely, so if we pull this out, I can go ahead and give this a pull. I'll maybe turn this sideways so you can see it this way. We'll give this a pull and it rolls. And then when you're done using your filament and you push it back in here, it will kind of, it doesn't roll back the other way. It doesn't have an active roller. But the little guide up here does a pretty good job of at least keeping it lined up with the spool, so you can push a pretty good amount of slack back in there before you have any sort of problems or tangles or anything like that. And then you just put that cap back on and you're good to go. All right, so we have our roll of filament here safely stored inside of our new dry box container, and it's ready to print with. If I look at the hygrometer right now, it's still reading about 39% humidity. This is something I saw with all these other ones as well. When I first loaded them up, it takes these hygrometers, at least the versions I have, a little bit of time to kind of stabilize at a humidity level. So I expect over the next couple of hours, this thing will drop down to the, somewhere between 10 and 15% range, just like all the rest of them did, as this desiccant down here as well starts to do its job and suck up any additional moisture that would have gotten into this container while we were loading it, right? But other than that, this thing is ready to print. And I can go ahead and just include it with the rest of my stored filaments, which right now I've just been putting on a shelf down here underneath my workbench area. Now, thinking about the future of this project and things related to it, I have a couple of different ideas. One thing is I have this IKEA Scatus pegboard up here behind my printer area, and you can see I've got a couple of filaments up here with their spools just on these holders, and they're obviously exposed to the air. So these are ones that I don't care so much about the humidity getting into them. But one thing I would like to do is potentially look at some sort of system where these could slot into there as well. So I'm going to design some parts for that pegboard that I can stack these things a few high and have them easily accessible, at least for the colors that I use most often, and just pull them off the wall when needed, put them on the printer, and then pop them back up there when I'm done. So that's one thing. And then on this Voron 2.4, currently, the bin that I'm printing with, I just put up here on top of the printer, and I let that feed in to the back of the printer where it normally goes. But I might also build a similar type of mounting bracket that would go over here on the side of this printer as a way to keep the filament from having to be just sitting here on top and kind of be locked in place while we're printing. So that's another option as well as far as how to store these things. So I'm looking at those two things. And then kind of a longer term idea, something that I'm not really sure yet if I'm going to need, and I'm going to have to, over a longer period of time, watch how the humidity levels within these containers work, and whether these filament rolls are ever going to need any additional active drying to dry them back down. Currently, I'm thinking they won't, but it still might be a fun project to build the other thing that I had in mind, which is some system where you would pull the desiccant bin out of the bottom of this, and exposing that opening, that round opening that's sealed, and then plop this whole thing down right on top of some sort of active heated drying system. So inspired and similar to Polymaker's Poly Dryer system, if you've seen that, it came out fairly recently. I'm thinking we could build a do-it-yourself version of something like that, where you put these things down on top of an active dryer if you ever do need to dry out the contents inside here, and then you'd pop the desiccant bin back in place once that was done. So that's something that's longer term that I'm thinking about, but I'm not really sure at this point whether it's needed and whether it's something that I'm going to build. If you have any thoughts or suggestions or ideas in regards to that, in regards to kind of an ecosystem of additional parts and projects around this type of a system, let me know about those things down in the comments. I'm interested in those and kind of expanding this over time. And while you're down there, if you wouldn't mind putting a like on the video too, that would help a lot for YouTube to know to spread this to more people. I think I mentioned earlier that my previous video from almost a year ago on a filament storage system is one of the most viewed videos on my channel. The thing is, this system's a whole lot better than that one, and so I'd rather YouTube suggest this to people than that older version of the video. And so I think we can all make that work by putting likes on this video and bumping it up in the algorithm. So if you could do that, I'd be grateful for that. And I think that's going to do it for this one. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, if you try this out and you have any problems with it, let me know about those things too, because I do want to expand this over time and improve it for people and make it something that's really, really usable. So far, it's super usable for me, but I'm the only one who's been using it. So if you have other ideas, I'd love to hear those. And with that said, I think we're done for today. Go print something awesome with dry filament. That'd be cool. And I'll see you next time, and I hope you have a great day.